Hi, I'm Shane Donahue, and I'm joining you today to talk about the Google Security Center on behalf of SADA Systems in our Working with Workspace video series. I am a sales engineer with SADA Systems, and I have been working with Workspace as my specialty for about 7 years now. Beyond that, I've done work historically in network security and PCI DSS, so they decided that I was probably one of the better people in our org to talk to you guys about Workspace, specifically the Security Center features of Workspace. Around that, we're going to be talking about things like security dashboards, security health, and the new Google investigation tool. And we'll be looking at those as well in a demo format towards the later end of this presentation. First off, the security dashboards. What are the security dashboards? They are a functional system that allows you to get an at-a-glance review of what's going on inside your environment. And that's going to include things like email insights, OAuth grant activity. You can kind of get an idea of what's going on for applications and services that are accessing your data. We can also review our drive activity, things like sharing permissions changes, internal versus external visibility. All this, including our DLP incident reports, if you have DLP enabled, on the fly as a really easy to review graph to notice any sort of trend differences or changes within your Google environment. We'll also be taking a look at the security health section. Using the security health section, we can reduce the risk within our Google environment by reviewing our current configurations versus Google's best practice. This is actually done on a setting by setting basis, including throughout the organizational units. And we'll be, of course, reviewing that. And then easily my favorite tool set of the trio is the investigation tool. If you've ever had to be an email administrator or do any sort of investigation of breach activity or security events within your organization, or even just preventative maintenance, investigation tool is absolutely the first place to go. We've got everything from comprehensive queries to being able to take actions at scale across your Google tenant. With that, let's go ahead and switch over to the demo. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up the Google admin panel here. Within the admin panel, all three of these features are available within the security section. Inside the security section, let's take a look at the dashboard first. So you'll see here that I get a graph set looking at the top here, a lot of email issues that are present within any sort of organization. So spoofing, authentication problems, and phishing attacks that our mail system within Google Workspace has identified and notified me of, and also given me some actions and things that it's triggered there. So we're looking at spoofing, spam filter, and phishing. If I go down here, I can actually get more information behind any of these charts at a glance. So if I hit View Report, you'll see that I scroll down a little bit here, and I can see that it looks like my problem days are March 15th, 16th, 17th. So these are days that we have issues. Now we're looking at March 18th. That's today's date with this. If I close this, select a filter, and choose a date that's more applicable, one of our problem dates, we can go ahead and look at, say, the 17th. We have a lot of events on there. I hit Apply. And you'll see here that we've got some heads ups on some messages that came through, some webinars, some thank you messages and such that are appearing to come as our domain. So in this case, it looks like these are actually some WebEx webinars that have been done from this domain, and the messaging went out from that domain. So these are probably A-OK, but it does indicate that I need to go ahead and adjust maybe my SPF records or some of my Google settings within Gmail to make sure that those messages are getting treated as acceptable and confidence messages. So that's going to give me an idea. I can also dig into this a little bit more and say, okay, who's the sender of these? It looks like, yep, it was GoToWebinar is the problem child right there. So we can certainly correct that one pretty easily. I can even track down the IP address of these and take this information very, very easily to other systems as I need to start adding trust. If I back up to the dashboard, we're not just looking at email data though. Although there is quite a lot of it, including things like encryption and message delivery. We're also looking at things like drive sharing. Within drive sharing here, I can see the actual trend of file share events within my organization. So this being a test domain, it's usually pretty neutral or low. But if I look here, we had a bit of a spike on the 6th. So again, if I hit View Report, I can expand this and dig into that information to help me clarify what we're looking at. So, really helpful tools for identifying security trends within your Google Workspace environment. Scrolling down a little further, we also have a really helpful one that doesn't get enough credit. We have our user reports and feedback side of things. So you'll see here that we have our spam, not spam, and phishing flags. This is the feedback from the Google Workspace system, the actual user entries and replies to specific messages. So we can track trends within our workspace on how much users are reporting something as a phishing event or as a spam or not spam event to see how well those filters are doing. We can also see if there's a lack of activity here to understand if we've got users that are saying there's a spam problem, I'm getting a lot of messages with this, and we come back to a flat line. We know for a fact that users haven't been responding or feeding back into the system to help correct that issue themselves. We also have some elements from our safety section, which is going to cover suspicious attachments. Our MDM is also covered in here, including things like compromised device events and device activities, failed password attempts and logins, and then, as I mentioned, the OAuth grant activity and scope. So you'll see here that one of the apps that's recently gotten access to our data is Coursera through a single grant. We also have a regular use of GAM on this particular test tenant for experimentation, practice, and prep moments, as well as a little bit of work there. So very helpful, again, to kind of review that, even what products those tools are being used against. So it looks like we had a pretty active day on the 14th. And again, we can dig into that with the view report. Login user failed login attempts and our DLP incident. So it looks like we had some. So I'm pretty sure we were doing some testing and events on the 15th there, which is why we have quite the upswing in our DLP event severity there. The DLP event severity is set in the DLP section. We'll talk about that one in another session there. But again, if I hit my view reports here, I can see exactly what we're looking at for that. And as a helpful feature, some of these do offer the ability to jump right over to the investigation tool and bring this information in so we can look at specifically that data. Now, I'm not going to do that right now because we have a couple other things I want to cover before we get into the pièce de résistance, the investigation tool. So we've talked about kind of the dashboard here. There is a lot of information here, which may be on the overwhelming side. So one of the perks about using the dashboard here is that this is a customizable view. You can create your own settings to get your own information based on audit and log reports, but you can also just change what's visible to you. So if you're an email admin, I'm not too worried about my drive shares. I can go ahead and move that off and make sure that this view remains relevant to me. And these cards are not also not this giant typically. You have to give me a little bit of leeway here on the presentation side. We are presenting at a little bit of a magnified view to make it visible there. So that's the security dashboard side of things. Let's go ahead and back up in the security center here. And we're going to take it into the security health section next. So security health, it's going to take just a second to spin here because it's actually going out and checking all these settings here. What this tool does is this gives us a list of Google's most common best recommendations for security settings within your org and how they're set right now. So if I scroll through my list here, you'll see that right off the bat, we're getting things like calendar sharing policy, our drive section here, including things like our access checker, desktop access to drive, Gmail settings, including things that are external to Google. So DKIM, DMARC, those are both available there. It'll do those checks for you. But if we look at these, we'll see that we have our kind of settings here that say, oh, it's enabled for, let's take a look at our sign-in requirement for external collaborators. Right now, this is disabled for 9 organizational units. And you'll see that I don't have a green check mark right on that. If I mouse over my green check mark here, we've got a secure configuration for warning on out of domain sharing, and we get our little blurb that tells you about that and why it should be that way. But if I hit my recommendation here, my gray box, it says, configure all of your organizational units to require collaborators to sign in with a Google account. This reduces the risk of data leaks. Seems like a pretty straightforward correction to me. If I click on my org units, I'm going to get a list of organizational units that are actually set and where those settings are kind of out of bounds or where they're out of best recommendation. So we'll see here that we do have it at the top level. We may have a reason for that, but we also have it specifically set at a few different levels out of compliance. Now, if I'm going to go ahead and update and clean up this particular situation, there may be a need for this sharing setting to be enabled for certain organizational units. So for that, I want to go ahead and log which OUs are set which way, so that I can take some notes later on and compare if I run this tool again to say, okay, nothing changed here. These are the ones that are out of compliance. And I do that really easily just by creating a Google Sheet with this information in it with one click. I just have to pick a file name there. So I don't need to do that this particular time. But if I want to go ahead and start correcting these, this is my favorite part of this section is a little obfuscated, but right here in the corner, there's the open tree diagram section. And if I hit that, I'm going to get the tree view of this, which is pretty helpful. But if I go ahead and see that I've got my orange flags on these, let's go ahead and pick on Jensen 2. It's going to actually open me up a new tab here. It's going to take me back into the admin panel. It's going to load up the drive and docs section. It's going to load up the sharing settings section. It should auto pick this from the OU list, and I have my options right here to go ahead and adjust this like that. It's that quick to go ahead and remediate these. So if you've ever worked through workspace settings previously, you'll know that some of these can be multi-layers deep and they can be all over with organizational units. The idea behind this is to make this as streamlined as possible to get these corrections in place and help you out with this. So I'm going to go ahead and leave here. I don't need that copy anymore. But that's just kind of the drive settings there. As I mentioned, this is also going to cover things like Gmail under a lot of things like mail forwarding, DMARC, DKIM. If I move on to the next page, we're also going to get into a lot of functions around mobile device management, including some of the new desktop and device management functions, what's best to comply there, and even multi-factor authentication rollout. So we can see here, we have our security key options. That's the U2F security tokens. But we also, if I move on to the next page, just even basic two-step verification, whether it's enabled or disabled, and who's actually enrolling from an admin standpoint. So there's certainly other places where we can view the current user rollout, but generally the biggest one is we want to make sure our admins and super admins have that setting set so they're in this as the corrective front. So this org needs a little bit of cleanup in that front, but we use this mostly for testing, so there's no actual sensitive data in here. Moving out of the security health section, we're going to go ahead and move into the aforementioned favorite here, the investigation tool. Now, this is an incredibly powerful tool because this lets you dig into a lot of different elements of Google data and do it very, very quickly. So Google's going to use that, pinnacle of search technology there to be able to help you dig into things. So as we mouse through here, we see that we get things like calendar log events, chat log events, device data, drive log events, Gmail log events, Gmail messages, the actual messages, groups, meet, rules, user data, even voice log events are now available through the investigation tool. And this is super, super helpful. So I like to kind of go through a little bit of a scenario here. Somebody got an email message and they passed it to me and it was really, really, I didn't get a lot of information. They didn't actually send me the message. They just said, hey, I got a weird email. Could you look into that? Okay, that's not really helpful. Anything you kind of give me about it? He's like, yeah, it's security in the title or something. I don't know. It seems strange. I deleted it. Okay, cool. I can work with that. So I'm going to add a condition. Really, really simple condition. I'm just going to say, okay, we've got the subject contains word security. I'm going to hit that. I'm going to run my search here, and I'm going to get a bunch of messages back. Should take just a second. There we go. You'll see that I got 1 through 100 of many results. So security alert, browse hotels verified for health security. Okay, I'm getting a lot of kind of Google flack in here. So let's go ahead and clean that out real quick. So I'm going to go down to my sender field here. I need to scroll down just a little bit so I can see the slide bar. So I've got my sender, and I know that all the ones from no reply at Google accounts, they're probably fine. So what I'm going to do is just copy that value real quick. I'm going to add that as a sender is not Google, and run that again. And we've got a lot more of a narrowed message field here. So we can see, okay, who's actually been getting these messages, the date timestamps on them, who's been sending them. It looks like we got some Clark.com, some feed proxy, things like that. Again, who's got them. We even get to see the label history of this particular. So we've got a lot of stuff that's in the inbox on red. Looks like this one auto-filed away. But let's go ahead and pick one of these messages and pick on it a little bit. Looks like best deals on cheap internet, right number of... Seems suspect to me. Good enough for me. Let's go ahead and start to take some actions on this message. So the first thing we could do is really easily see if there's any other instances of this email floating around inside of our environment. A lot of times we're going to get that all by the same subject line. We could also do that via message ID. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run a pivot, and I'm just going to do Gmail messages by subject. This is going to create me a new search. It's going to autofill all that. If I hit search, we're going to find out any instances of that message in there. So best deals on cheap internet right now. It looks like we've got two people, Robert and Felicia. Got that one from Clark.com. Cool. Well, maybe it is a suspect email. So maybe we want to take some actions against it. So let's pick on this one here. And you'll see that I have my pivot twos again. I could take this elsewhere. I get a little bit of a different dialog depending on what section I'm clicking on. But under message ID, I get to do elements like viewing the header data, what the history of it is. That'll pop up in a new window for me. I can send that message over to quarantine if I want to eyes on that message as an administrator and potentially release it back to the user if it's okay, or completely get it out of there. This one's a little bit of a helpful where we can just send it to the inbox. This is more for those use cases where a user has lost track of something or needs a little bit of help finding it. Sometimes that pairs with things like restore message, which will pull it out of that pending delete bin and give you the ability to push that back in the mailbox. We also have our options to mark this message as spam or phishing. So maybe we'll do that to the first one. We can just say, mark that one as spam. This will mark it as spam. That's fine. I'm pretty confident that best deals on cheap internet, that's pretty spammy to me. But let's go ahead and also take a look at this one. So this is a different message. So what we're going to do here is we could also mark this one as a phishing event. Now, phishing and spam get treated differently by the back-end robots. They're going to look at that. They're going to say, oh, I see a trend of phishing from certain addresses or certain flags that are happening. We're going to go ahead and adjust and compensate for that in a little bit different ways. Maybe delivering a message warning to the recipient of a message that says, this is potentially a phishing message. Please be careful. I can also full-blown just delete this message from that user's inbox. And I can do all these actions in mass. So if I have a phishing event, a very targeted or a widespread phishing event, I can go ahead, find all those really, really quickly and apply the actions as I just did, as marking this as phishing, and then maybe going back and again, pulling those into quarantine or actually deleting those messages outright if I want to get rid of them. And we've gone through this whole as a demo in a couple of minutes. Imagine how quickly you can actually respond to this sort of event in this situation where you actually have to have expediency to it. So really, really quick capabilities there. So that's kind of the mail side of this tool set. Another one I like to go through is we're going to go ahead and delete these and start with a fresh page. And yep, that's fine. It was marked as spam. I'm going to go ahead and switch over here to drive log events. And I'm going to add a condition. We'll just pick something that says, let's see here. Prior visibility is private. And let's do, we should be able to do visibility change is external. So with this quick search is going to go ahead and run through my entire drive log event history. And it's going to go ahead and find me the actions where any document changed from previously just private to external. Now this one's a little bit of a detailed one, so it takes a second or two to spin up, but you'll see here that we've got some examples here of things like there's an expense report, animal assisted therapy. These are all things that may have transitioned. I'm just going to highlight the expense report one here, scrub to the right a little bit, and we see that we have it was previously private. It was shared externally. That change in user access was done by P. Rhodes. And it was targeted to share with a trainer account. We do generally have history with this one. This one's a private instance because this was an outside party that did that one, that had edit access to the particular document. But we can also see our old values, our new values. It looks like that was a specific ad to that particular person. So maybe we're searching a little too narrowly in this one. Let's go ahead and back up to this one. And let's see, I should be able to switch this to, let's see here, visibility. And maybe this one, I want to go ahead and switch this one because when this section, I can go ahead and see when I'm dealing with something that is actually public on the web or shared with the with link. So let's go ahead and see what's kind of widespread inside of our org here. And like that, we get a listing of any content that is now as tracked by the change in status in the event link. So you see here that we have our change access scope. Again, who did it, where they're doing it from, public in the domain. Some of this actually was retracted, it looks like, but the event was including that it was public previously and now has been pulled private. So we do get a lot of ability to kind of search these. One of my favorite elements of the drive section though here is if I go ahead and slide to the right, I select all these. What I can do is I can start to use those same kind of action functions we saw with Gmail in the drive settings. So right off the bat with one click, I can go ahead and disable download, print, copy. I can apply that kind of identity rights management in mass so that anybody with private visibility, limited visibility, so view access or comment access, will lose access to make any sort of downloads or copies of these. I could change the owner. This is a helpful one for kind of that cleanup or post-employee departure if we need to kind of fine-tune our departure. But this one right here, audit file permissions, is the big one. So if I hit this will take just a second to spin, and you'll see here that I now have not log entries on a per line basis, but I actually have the documents behind them. So we have some Project Alpha here. We've got some MediaKind testing, and we can see exactly who's attached to each one of these when I select on them. So I can go ahead and view that one is a Help Center doc. That one's by domain test. I can change that ownership here using these permission adjusts that are available here. I can also view this the other way around. So I can see this as people. So it looks like Chris Guth of this data feedback has access to team project data. I can also see what shared drives are involved in these, and then a quantity of any of these documents that have public link sharing enabled. So it should be most of these here. And again, I can edit that link sharing and make that adjustment really, really quickly to retract those permissions in mass. So really, really powerful tool set. And this is why this one is chalked up as my favorite. So these are a couple of really, really strong and common use cases we find for the investigation tool. All of these elements are tracked in the admin audit log. So there'll be a history of everything that's happening inside this tool. It's very granular. And there's also settings within the admin roles and permissions to go ahead and give you the option to allow you to dial in the permissions for a user who will have access to this tool. So you can restrict it down to email only access, visibility limitations on who can see what data, who can access or change anything. Really, really detailed granular permissions. So with that, that's been kind of our review of the Google admin and security investigation tools. I hope you've enjoyed this and found this really helpful and useful there. Just like to wish you all have a good day.